Okay, everyone. Welcome to the Logica Sandbox session. So thank you for joining the last session of the event, and thank you for staying with us until now. I hope I'll be able to show you something to make it useful for you. My name is Nikolai Schwertner. I'm a co-founder and CTIO of Interopian. We are a company which produces the interoperability platform. We also have built the Logica Sandbox and a number of smart on FHIR applications. The Logica Sandbox is a free service available to everybody in the cloud. So today we're going to use the Logica Sandbox as a test bed to demonstrate how we can build a very simple smart on FHIR application and the CDS hooks service and test them in real time using our own personal FHIR and smart on FHIR enabled sandbox. So I'm just going to give you a very brief introduction to Logica and the Sandbox, just at a lightning fast pace, and then we're going to dive straight into the tutorial section of the demonstration. Okay, so Logica is a consortium which includes a number of organizations, Intermountain Healthcare included, and the Veterans Administration. It has some ideal purposes to create a vibrant ecosystem of standards to be used in application development in healthcare. Also create a vendor-neutral marketplace. Logica has a number of initiatives, one of them being the Logica Developers Program. And under the Developers Program, you can find the Developers Portal, the Logica Sandbox, which we're going to be using today, which is a free service in the cloud, and an apps gallery where you can share applications. The Sandbox platform is essentially a free FHIR server in the cloud running happy underneath that you can register for and spin up your own FHIR servers at will. And it also is smart on FHIR enabled and CDS hooks enabled, and has a number of useful tools in terms of profiles and a number of other things. You can collaborate also with for your sandboxes with your collaborators. I already said it's built upon Happy, and you can spin up as many of those Happy instances and sandboxes as you wish. So the sandbox environment, of course, is a reference implementation level environment. So it's vendor neutral in that perspective, and it is faithful implementation of the standards, which is to say that when you develop against it, you're developing against an idealized environment, and that experience will translate to some degree once you move to productionize your environment, your application to the real world environment, for example, against Epic, Cerner, all scripts, but you still need to account for certain differences in those implementations. And for that, we can help you with that if you need assistance. We have a platform for that. But anyways, enough of that. Let's just dive straight into the demo. So I have this URL, which you folks should be able to see on your screen, bit.ly/Logica DevDays 2020, one word. So this URL is going to take you to a GitHub repository and I'm actually going to do exactly what I'm saying. So, okay, there we go. Here is my web browser. Hopefully that's visible on your screen as well. Okay, so this is the GitHub repository. And if you'd like to follow along, feel free to fetch a copy of this repo. Otherwise, you can watch the recording later at your own pace and go through the motions if you'd like to try the demo and at your own site. So I'm going to fetch a copy of this repository. So I'm going to get the URL of the repository, and I'm going to get it locally. So for that, we'll just pull up a terminal real quick here and use our trusty Git client. So we're going to say git clone, and then I'm just dropping in the URL of the repository, and boom, I've got the repository on my desktop here. So there we go. So let's launch an IDE. So in this case, I'm going to use Visual Studio Code, but feel free to use whichever IDE you'd like, doesn't matter. So Visual Studio
Hi,
Code.
hi, Nicholas.
Yes.
Hi, Nicholas. Sorry to disturb you. The chat is being disabled. Like, I would like to get that URL. Like, before I typed in, it went away. The DevDays URL you gave.
Okay.
It's not there in the chat.
All right. So here we go. bit.ly/Logica DevDays 2020. And thank you for that question.
Logica DevDays. Okay.
It's a bit lengthy. All right. So back into our demonstration. So I just pulled up an ID, and here we have two exercises. One of them is constructing a CDS hooks demo CDS hook, and the other one is constructing a Smart on FHIR demo application. So I would propose let's start with the CDS hook demo. So let's see what's in that directory, the CDS demo directory. I can make that a little bit bigger too, by the way. Maybe that will help on your screens, folks. If it's too small, and somebody please raise your hand, let me know. Otherwise, I will just assume that you're able to read it just fine. So in the CDS demo directory, we have three files. There is the README, which basically gives you the basic how to start here. And there is so this is going to be a Node.js application that we're going to build, folks. In fact, it's going to be an Express application. So we're going to use the Express framework on top of Node.js. You don't need a whole lot to build that. All you need is Node.js to install and download Node.js on your machine, which is super simple. Just go to nodejs.com, for example, or I'm not sure, Google will help you, and download and install the Node.js package, and you'll be done here. So just like any Node.js application, there is this file called package.js, which any Node.js application is going to have out there. And it's a declaration of the dependencies for the application. So the third-party libraries that we are going to need in order to get this thing to run in simple terms. So here we have defined a simple package.js. It says we're going to be building a simple CDS hooks demo, and we're going to be downloading Express, and then two other packages, Course and Morgan. I'm going to tell you a little bit about them later, and another package called NodeMon, which will allow us to run Node.js in development mode and refresh in real time. As we change the code, it will refresh the server. So all useful things, but pretty basic stuff in the Node.js world. So you can find a number of tutorials about those. And we also have set up a start command to launch our Node.js service for CDS, our CDS hooks. I'm going to assume, by the way, folks, that you know a thing or two about Smart on FHIR and CDS hooks here. So we are not going to go into all the basics, although we're going to demonstrate the basics through those applications. But I'm not going to talk at length about those standards. I assume that you know that you have basic familiarity with them. Otherwise, you can always watch the recording later and compare with the standards at will. All right, so that's our package.json. And then we have our JavaScript file, which basically implements, is where we're going to implement our CDS service. So, so right now I've included some boilerplate code here for you guys to work with. It doesn't do a whole lot. It's basically just prints a hello world on the screen. And it's pretty standard boilerplate code that you can copy from a number of websites. So nothing magical here. I've just modified it just a little bit so it's specific to our needs, but it's pretty standard at this point, what you're seeing on the screen. Just to give you a general overview, we're loading the Express Course package, Express Course Morgan packages. The Express package loads the framework. It's essentially a web services, web server framework that will allow us to serve over HTTP. The Course package basically allows us to add course headers to our HTTP responses, which is going to be necessary for testing our CDS service. the Morgan framework, essentially a logger, which is going to allow us to see in the console the calls, the HTTP calls that we are receiving. So that's going to be helpful. Then we tie it all together into creating an app project, and then set up a few constants here: the name of the server, the base of the server, the port where the server is going to load, and we also tie the course and the logger in this case being Morgan, together to get the whole application all packaged together. And finally, we are setting here a response. We're telling the server to respond to a GET HTTP request at the base URL, which in this case is just / the base URL, and respond to that with the message hello world. Pretty simple. And then we're going to launch the whole server finally on our chosen port and print a helpful message on the screen, which hopefully is going to tell us that the server is running and be able to help us identify the port. Okay, so now that we have that, let's just launch the server. So how do we do that? If you follow the README, you're going to see in the README, because I know it pretty much, I'm just going to do it, but you can see that in the README, you need to do two things. First of all, you need to do an npm install or npm I in short to fetch all the dependencies, and it's going to only take a few seconds. Amazing. So now I have all my dependencies downloaded. And at this point, I can just start the server again from the README, npm start. All right, and now let's take a look at the output here. Our example server is running on port 300. Beautiful. Now we have it. Let's try this URL and see what happens. So localhost 300 responds with hello world. Wow, great. Very good, beautiful. So that's a great start, but not very useful. Let's now see how to turn this pretty much vanilla web server into a working CDS service, CDS hook CDS service. So for that, let's first go to our to Sandbox. Let's initialize a Sandbox environment for Logica. So you can go to sandbox.logicahealth.org or Google Logica Sandbox. It's going to take you there. You may need to go through a registration process if you don't have an account already on Logica. And once you set up your account and register and log in, you'll be at a screen like this, which is going to list all of your sandboxes. Because this is a fresh account, there is not going to be any sandboxes available. You need to create a sandbox. So click on New Sandbox, and then pretty much choose a name for your sandbox. I'll say DevDays 2020 for my sandbox, and the system is going to generate an ID for your sandbox. Check that it's unique and available. If not, it's going to yell at you. You can change it at will. This one is available, so I'm going to stick with it. Then you have to choose the FHIR version for your sandbox. R4 is right now the recommended version, so let's go with that. An open endpoint, let's not do that. That's pretty much circumventing all security protocols. You don't want that. Import sample patients and practitioners, you can do that, and these are the defaults. In this case, I'm just going to launch a pretty vanilla empty sandbox, which doesn't have either sample patients or sample applications. So it's going to be an empty sandbox. So we're going to create that sandbox. Ooh,
Hello.
so that already exists. All right, let's go back. So no problem.
Yeah, hi.
Okay, DevDays 2020B. All right.
Sure. 2:15. Okay, sure. We'll be there.
We're hearing somebody, folks. If you can mute yourself. Thank you. All right. So Sandbox will take a few seconds to get created, and then you can go straight into your sandbox by clicking on it. Okay, now we are in our sandbox. Not a whole lot going on. It's empty. No apps, no patients, no nothing. So go to patients, that's also going to say no patients. So first thing first, in this case, we want to load it with some sample data. You could just initialize the sandbox, your sandbox with sample data. I am going to actually, just for this demonstration, import the sample data from a file. In this repository that DevDays 2020 on GitHub, in the root directory, you see a bundle, bundle-d.json, which contains a bundle of patients. You can load this file in the import import function of the Sandbox manager, and it's going to load this bundle of sample data into your Sandbox. So now we have sample patients. We go to patients, we will see that we have patients Max Mustermann and Sophie Eichel. So here we have two sample patients. If you click on either one of them, we're going to see that they have some data attached, some, in this case, medication requests. So things look good. If I click on practitioners, we'll see that you have Carol Müller as your practitioner. So this is all great. So now let's create let's register our CDS hook. Well, if you go to the CDS hook screen, click on plus, that's where you register the CDS hook. Our CDS hook, CDS service is going to be, if you go back to the console, remember it's port 3000, so it's going to be responding to HTTP localhost 3000. So we can just paste it here and just click load. However, it's not going to work just yet because it's not yet a CDS hooks service. We can try it just in case. It will tell us URL is not defined. And if you look in the console for your application, you'll see that what the Sandbox manager tried to do is retrieve the /cds-services URL on your server. This is a special directory which basically should contain a manifest for your CDS, a declaration of what kind of CDS services you have. So right now nothing responds here because we don't have any route registered with our Express server. We need to do something about that. Let's go back to our application and work on that. Well, what can I do? I can change the base. Let's change the base to CDS services. Bam. Okay, there we go. So now we're going to have something responding to this /CDS services URL. It's not going to be the right thing though. It's going to be saying hello world. It needs to say something else, by the way. So you can check out the specification of CDS hooks and see what's the format for this declaration of your services. But I'm going to spare you the time in this tutorial. So I'm going to just help you out here. So it's actually going to be a JSON structure, what you need to return. And this JSON structure is going to contain, it's going to be an object, which is going to have one property called services. And this property is going to be a list, essentially, of services that you're going to be declaring. No need to create too many of those for our demonstration purposes. Let's just create one service. Well, the service would have the following properties. That's part of the specification. It needs to have an ID. In this case, let's call it, we're going to create a greeter service. So let's give it the ID greeter. Then it's going to have a title. And in this case, let's call it a greeter service. Pretty simple. Description is the next parameter that it needs to have. And we're going to say CDS service that greets the patient. So something that will be suitable for a hello world type of CDS hook service. And finally, the other thing that you must have is a hook. So basically, you need to tell the CDS hooks controller to which hook to register the CDS service, for which hook to basically invoke the CDS service. Let's register this service for the patient view, hook, which is going to be triggered whenever we open the patient record. Okay, so now we have this. I hit save, so I saved the file, and if I look on the console, I see that my server picked up on the change and got restarted by this magic nodemon module. So always good. We can now try to register the server one more time. So copy the URL over. I know I'm going a little bit fast, folks, so I apologize for that. I know you'll be able to slow this down later on the recording of the session. So hopefully that's going to help. Okay, and look at that. This time, everything worked. I actually got my greeter service registered. So what I entered in this configuration, the greeter service and the CDS service that greets the patient, all got picked up here by our Logica Sandbox. And if you look under info, you'll see that everything that I entered, it's registered for the patient view hook, its ID is greeter. You can see that in JSON format, everything checks. So now I have a CDS service registered. We can launch that CDS service. We can hit launch, and it's not going to work because we don't have a persona. Okay, let's fix that. Let's go to personas. We don't have any personas. We can create either patient or practitioner personas. Let's create a practitioner persona using our only single practitioner. And now we have a persona. So now we can go back to CDS hooks and we can launch the service and see what happens. We need to select the practitioner, we need to select the patient, and nothing happens because the URL is not defined. So the issue here is that, okay, while we do have now the CDS service, we have the manifest responding to the /CDS services /CDS services path, which we can test, by the way. If you'd like to test it, you basically do CDS services. So here is the pathway, and you'll see that it responds with the JSON fragment that we created. So that looks good. But now, according to the spec, now that we have defined a service, we need to have a service listening to localhost 300 CDS services /greeter. So the ID of the service that we defined, it needs to be there and listening to post requests at that. And that's not happening. That's why we're getting the error message. So we need to do that just as well. So let's just copy this, what we have here, and let's change it to post. And then we're going to need to respond with something to this post request. So let's do the following, folks. Let's create an array, a list called cards. A CDS hook service, folks, responds with cards, one or more cards. And of course, these are all JSON structures which get rendered on the screen. So here I'm going to create this cards array, which is going to be containing the cards that I'm going to respond. And I'm going to drop that back into a JSON object where it's going to be attached to the cards property. So this is the structure of the response of a CDS hook service. It needs to be cards and then have a list of cards here. So now all is good. We can save that and we can try relaunching the service. By the way, let's try that real quick and then I'll tell you, okay. Okay. Aha. Yes. So here is the problem. So I created a post request which is listening to base, but it needs to listen actually to something a little bit different. So it needs to listen to base /greeter. This is where it needs to listen to. So let's change that. And now let's try. Reference URL is not defined. So CDS services /greeter. Whoops. Yes, so the base actually, so I'm using a template side of JavaScript here, and I just need to fix my syntax. So a little bit of real world debugging, folks. Run that, and there we go. This run just fine. The thing is, we didn't submit any cards. It was an empty array, so no cards got rendered on the screen, but it worked so far. So let's add a card here to the list. So before we return, we're going to push a card into the list, just so that we have something to work with. So cards.push, and then let's create the card. So the card is going to be a JSON fragment. It will have an ID, and in this case, it's going to be okay. Sorry about that. So a card is going to have a summary. And the summary is plain text. So let's call it a greeting. And then it's going to have detail. which is an extended text, basically containing the text of what the card is going to say. And since it's a patient greeter service, it makes sense that it says hello patient, for example. So we're going to put just that here. And finally, it needs to have an indicator. Okay, very good. And this indicator is one of info, warning, critical, how, error. I believe there are a couple of those. You can check them up in the standard. In this case, let's do an info message on the screen. So this is the structure of our card. So summary, greeting, detail, hello patient, indicator, info. Let's save and let's relaunch our CDS service. By the way, folks, I'm going to show you very quick another capability here. So as you can see, each time I launch the service from clicking on launch, I need to select a persona and a patient each and every time. That gets tedious very quick while I'm building and testing. So instead of doing this, what you can do is go to launch scenarios. I don't have any right now, but I'm going to create a launch scenario based on my CDS service. So let's pick our CDS service. So I'm going to, through a wizard, we're going to pick Carol Muir as our practitioner. We can pick one of the patients, doesn't matter in this case. Since our CDS service is not very smart just yet, it wouldn't care, but that will change once we improve it, and we're going to save it. So now I have a repeatable test case, basically. Where I can just keep on launching that over and over and over again with that context, just like this. I click play and it launches and I see the result. And wow, in this case, I got my greeting card rendered on screen. So it says greeting and hello patient. So beautiful, I have that and it works. So that's the card. You can actually see some technical details here to help you debug your CDS service. It responded in 4.24 milliseconds. The standard specifies it needs to respond within a certain number of milliseconds. So that's a good way to gauge your service. The request, what my service received from the EHR is right here. So I can inspect it. That's what I received. And the response is basically what we constructed as the response. So the greeting, hello patient, info, everything which we put in that application is coming back and it's rendered on screen as this card. And there we go. So now we have our CDS service. If you go to the EHR simulator in the top right corner of the screen and set up a patient, actually you're going to see your CDS service registered and responding right here. See, I have my greeting, which is, and so forth. You can create as many of those as you like. So that's really nice. You can create additional CDS services here. For example, I can copy that. I can create another one. So, for example, immunizations, and have a message which says check immunizations. So supposedly a reminder for the practitioner. And let's do that, change that into a warning and just save that real quick. And then relaunch our CDS service and let's see what happens. Okay, now we have two cards, the greeting card and then the immunizations reminder card. And there we go. You can start expanding on that and you can make it smarter. You can make actually some use of the data. You can register prefetch requests and ask for additional data for the patient. That's how you're essentially are building a CDS service and utilizing Logica. All right, folks. So that's about the CDS demo. Now let's switch gears and look at the application demo. So I am going to, where are we? Let's go to the apps demo directory. And it's another Node.js application. So it has a README to get you oriented, a package.json. In this case, we're going to launch an HTTP server, which is going to serve some static content on port 9090. And this static content is going to be two files, launch.html and index.html are going to be the two files that which we're going to serve, folks. So that's the structure of a basic Smart on FHIR application, what you're seeing on the screen. we need to have two endpoints, the launch endpoint and then the redirect endpoint. And here we are essentially implementing those endpoints as the launch.html and index.html files. And we're going to have some JavaScript here. So right now it's just boilerplate code, which doesn't do anything. And we'll need to complete that code as part of the exercise. So first thing first, let's launch that server and make sure that our application is available on port 9090. So again, just like before, I'll do an npm I to install all the dependencies, and then npm start is going to launch my application on port 9090. All right. Now, let's go to our Logica Sandbox, go to apps and register the application. So I'm going to click on register my application, my cool app. It's going to be a public client. I'm not going to dive into the details of that at the moment. And we are just going to enter the URL, localhost 9090 /launch.html. Launch.html is our launch endpoint. It generates the next endpoint automatically, the redirect, which index.html is going to be the default one. It's going to respond to that endpoint. So this looks good. I'll leave everything else as is and just save it. I just received the client ID. So that's the client ID for my application. I need to remember this one, folks. So I'm just actually going to drop it into my application right here, because I'm going to need it in just a second. All right, let's try to launch that application and see what happens. So launch the application with Carl Mueller and Max Mustermann. We got hit with a request, but not found. So that didn't go very well. So launch.html is what we got hit, but nothing responded. That's because right now we don't have anything happening in launch.html. So folks, as part of our exercise, we also downloaded the FHIR client, a JavaScript client for building smart on FHIR applications, which is distributed by the Smart Health IT consortium. And here we have included it into our application. So this SRC includes that. So we need to utilize that client to bootstrap our application. So in order to do that, you can read the documentation of the client, but it looks something like this. So FHIR OAuth to authorize. And we need to provide a couple things here. And we actually need to give it the client ID, which goes like this, client ID. And now we need to drop in our client ID. Here we go. And then we need to give it the scopes, which the application is going to be requesting. In this case, let's request the patient.read scope. So we're going to request read access to essentially the patient resource right here. So that should help bootstrap our application. That tells the smart client bootstrap the application. Let's save that and let's relaunch our application. And just to save ourselves the pain, again, I'm going to create a launch scenario with my application in just 10 seconds, literally, so that I'm able to launch the application without a whole lot of pain. Here we go. So that's my application. And let's just launch it from here. So that's going to save us a little bit of time. Okay, so this time we got something different. We got past the launch.html, so that bootstrapped to an extent, but we got an error from our authorization server, invalid scope. So patient.read is an invalid scope. Let's check what's happening with that. If we go under applications and settings for our application, you see the we have a patient/start.start, but we don't have patient.read. Let's add it. So we're going to allow the patient.read scope here at the client level. Save that. And then in launch scenarios, we are going to relaunch our application. And in this case, okay, beautiful. We got an authorization screen. That's our OAuth server asking us to authorize the application. So now things look good. It's telling us what the application is asking for, and we can authorize the application. We'll hit authorize, and now we are at the redirect URL. The application got a code and some state and some other things which are related to the Smart on FHIR standard. Beautiful. So we're now has launched our first Smart on FHIR application. It doesn't do much still. It just says hello. Let's try to do a little bit more here. Let's try to fetch the patient name, for example, and print it on screen just to make it actually do a little bit of work, if not a whole lot. So our launch.html looks good. So that's all fine. Let's go to our to the main FHIR of this application, which is the index.html. This is where all the action is happening. It's an HTML page, basically, which has an H1 tag, which is a placeholder. This is where we're going to print the message. Then it loads the Smart on FHIR JavaScript client in the next line. And then it allows us to enter a little bit of JavaScript code. In this case, I have a placeholder, which basically all it does is it adds hello inside this tag. And that's why on the screen we see hello, basically. But now this is the place where we want to make it a little bit more useful. So we need to, again, get hold of the client in order to do anything with the Smart JavaScript client. So that goes like this: FHIR.OAuth2.ready. So this is going to give us our client. And once we have the client, we can then do useful things with it. So we're going to create a function here, which takes the client, and then let's run client.patient.read. So we're going to ask the client to fetch the patient resource for us. And once it fetches the patient resource, so then with the patient resource, we can do something useful. Well, let's just print the patient resource on the screen, in the console rather, and see what's in it. That's bound to help us. If this works, once I reload the application, if I look at the debug tools in my browser in the console, which I just loaded the debug tools, I reload the application. Okay, there we go, beautiful. Nothing changed on the screen, but under the hood in the console, you see that now it actually was able to fetch the patient resource, and we can see inside what's in there. And we're looking for the name. The name is an array. It has one or more elements. In this case, it has one element. It has given name and so forth. Okay, let's try to make something useful of that. So we said patient has a name, and name is one of a couple of things. So let's create a variable name. And in this case, let's get patient.name. And we are going to do something silly here, which we don't want to do in a production application. We'll just always fetch the first of these names and disregard the rest, just to make it quick here. So now we have the name, and then what we have in the name? We have family and given is an array of things. Okay, let's pick the given name and pick the first one of the given name, which is his first name. So we're again going to assume he always is going to have a given name, and always the first one is going to be the correct one. A silly assumption that you don't want to do in production, but for our purposes, yeah, why not? And then let's grab our command, which changes the HTML, and add this greeting here. So we're going to templatize the message. So it's going to be hello, and then we're going to print the name in here. Save that, refresh. Okay, and there we go, folks. Now we have hello Max as, so the application actually now greets us with the name of the patient. Well, let's test it. Let's run with the other patient just in case, to make sure that is correct. So I'm going to relaunch the application with Sophie, in this case, the second sample patient. It's going to run me through the authorization screen. I'm going to click authorize, and it says hello Sophie. So there we go. That's a basic Hello World application. I was hoping to have a little bit more time and show you a little bit more. I wanted to expand this application to fetch some medications for the patient and some other nifty things, but we're running a little bit short on time here. So I am going to wrap this tutorial at this point, folks. Hope this has been very useful to you and gives you at least a start in building Smart on FHIR and CDS hooks services and applications on Smart on FHIR using the Logica Sandbox. The Logica Sandbox has a number of interesting features which will help you. I showed you just some basics, but you can load profiles and validate data against the profiles. There is an EHR simulator. You can import and export data, run FHIR queries, and see the results of those from the Sandbox manager right here. You can do validation of your resources. You can run external tools such as the CDS hooks, Harness, CleanFHIR, Inferno, Crucible. You can invite other users to join and collaborate on your Sandbox. There is a whole lot of functionality here, and under the hood there is a fully fledged FHIR server that you can connect to. It's a wonderful development environment that is free at the moment for everybody to use. So I'm going to finish the presentation. So this is actually not fresh data. This is as of last June. Logica had over 4,000 users and 2,000 sandboxes. Not 2,000 sandboxes now. There must be more. You can learn more about Logica on logicahealth.org. The developers website is developers.logicahealth.org. The sandbox that we use today lives on sandbox.logicahealth.org. That's where you can register for an account just as well. And again, folks, my name is Nikolai Schwertner. You can reach me at nikolai@interopian.com. Happy to talk to you anytime. And if you need any assistance with anything, let me know. So thank you very much for participating in this tutorial. At this point, we'll take any questions if anybody has questions.
Nikolai, there is one question. Others are welcome to unmute their mic, and then they can also ask questions, but can patient and provider resources be exported from the Logica Sandbox? If
Correct.
so, what export formats are available?
Very good. Thank you for that question. Anything which is inside the Logica Sandbox, of course, is FHIR and can be exported. So it will be exported as a FHIR resource. So if you go to Data Manager, then Export, and you can either enter a FHIR query to restrict what you're going to be exporting, or you can export everything which you've got in this sandbox by just clicking on Export all the files, all to file, and then a few moments later, you should get a link here to download a JSON bundle, a JSON file, a bundle, which is a FHIR resource, which is going to contain all of your, oh, here we go, that's my file, download file. And if I download it, I'm going to have this bundle, which essentially is a FHIR resource, which contains everything that I have on this sandbox, which is all the FHIR resources. It includes the patients, the practitioners, and so forth. It's that simple.
Very good. Another question. Are write operations possible in Logica?
Yes, absolutely. Read and write operations are possible. Patient user scopes, EHR launched applications, embedded applications, standalone applications just as well, short-lived and long-lived OAuth tokens, so refresh tokens, the whole range essentially of the Smart on FHIR spec is available for you to use. And so, yeah, it's a fully functional reference implementation.
All right, very good. I think that brings us to the end.
All right, thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.
You too.